Well, welcome. It's tough, right? 4:30 p.m. So I don't know how many presentations you had. So. I'll try to shock you maybe, so that you will react. That's what I love to do. If it's just talking about startups by itself, it's not so much interest. But so let me begin directly. For me, these are startups, and some people disagree with me. But for me, these were startups. I shouldn't say they are startups, but they are still startups because most of them have kept a culture, and I think startups are about a culture. You know these names, so I don't need to introduce them, but what for me a startup means, it's a company which creates a lot of value, and if you look at the smallest of these ones, Twitter has a value of $30 billion. So talking about startups in billions of dollars is strange. And if you talk about jobs, if you don't like value creation, it's in average 50,000 jobs. So startups create, when they are successful, tons of jobs. And what is also for me very important is when you look at the time between the creation of a company and the time it goes public, so the IPO is initial public offering, in the US it's 5 years. And maybe, so you know the name, right? From Apple to Twitter with Intel and Cisco and Oracle. It's only IT, it would be the same in biotech, we could do the same in the US, it would be similar. But I want you to work for 30 seconds, and then you can sleep if you don't like what I do. But I want you to give me names of the top European startups. I am French, I'm not really Swiss, but you are from Romania, we are all Europeans. We belong to a continent, and I want you to give me the name of the most famous startups, because I have a very specific definition of startups. And by the way, I cheated a little because I didn't put HP, because I want companies which are less than 50 years old. HP, I'm not sure it was ever a startup because it took them many years to go public. They didn't have venture capital. I mean, it was a different history. But so, European startups. Skype. What was the value of Skype? 5 billion, right? So it's not even, it's 6 times smaller than Twitter. But Skype, yes, you're right. Well, I'm not. Well, okay. Let's talk technology, right? We're at EPFL. Yeah, EasyJet could be considered also as a startup. But let's talk technology companies. Yeah, Red Bull, Skype, EasyJet. You're struggling, right? Which is a first sign, right? There's something wrong with Europe. We don't have Apple computer. We don't have Google, but we have a few. The young people can give me names, no?
Well, I know one Romanian one, but it's nowhere near anything like that.
So you have your success stories.
Uberview, yeah.
EPFL.
That's not a startup.
Sorry?
Adidas,
maybe? It could. I don't know all the stories, all the histories of companies, but you might be. How old is Adidas? Maybe 100 years old, no?
50, 60 years old.
There's one company in Europe, which is a technology company, which is less than 50 years old, which is as big as this one. There's, in fact, only one, but I'm sure you know it. Which is not Nokia, because Nokia is 150 years old. And, not even, no, but why not? Well, in France, we could say Alcatel for the same reasons, but I don't think they were ever startups. And Siemens is probably also very old, no? Yeah. But my point is, there's something wrong in Europe because we don't have this model of companies. Maybe we have other models, but if we talk about startups, we are struggling in creating startups. And what I will talk in the next 30 minutes, 45 minutes, I have about 30 slides, so please, it's not I talk and then you ask me questions. Ask me question anytime. That's the point. But so I can show you my list. I can show you my list. Well, the only yeah, Logitech was one, yeah, but Logitech is even smaller than Skype, huh? So Logitech would not make the list of the. In terms of size, Logitech would be ranking number. But Logitech, yes. In fact, Logitech is on the list. Logitech is here, number 6, 2.5 billion, 7,000 employees. No, the real success story is SAP. the German company doing software, right? It's 92 billion in valuation, 66,000 people. So this is a company which is, give me 30 seconds, it can be compared. But except SAP, and you can have a look at the list, and most of them you probably even do not know them, but it's a sign. Sorry, yes?
I thought that SAP was a spin-off from IBM, for an IBM project.
There were 4 IBM engineers, but I'm not sure it's a spin-off. I have the feeling they left because they decided to create SAP. But in a way, you know, if I'm looking at Intel was a spin-off of Fairchild, and well, the other ones were not spin-offs, you're right. But SAP, there's still an element of startups, except it took them 16 years to go public, right, from 1972 to 1988. So the other points I want to make, if I take these, I'm not sure these are the 10 biggest success stories in Europe, but first the value is 30 billion, and the number of employees in average is 10,000. And again, if I'm coming back to the US, it's 177 billion, the average of these 10 companies, and it's 58,000 employees. The reason why I'm always beginning with these slides is many people tell me, yeah, but startups are not important because they don't create jobs. And it's not true. When they're successful, they create a lot of jobs. But of course, they have to be successful, and that's something. I still put Nokia, but look at Nokia. Nokia was created in 1865. Now, when they decided to move in the technology business, it was in 1966. But in any case, Nokia will probably disappear soon. And the other point I want to make is from the time of foundation to the time of IPO, of course, it's stupid to make an average of 10 companies, but it takes 10 years. So we are, in a way, 10 times smaller, and it takes us twice the amount of time to be 10 times slower and 10 times smaller, which is painful because Europe and the US, in terms of economic size, are the same, right? They have Boeing, we have Airbus, they have General Motors, we have Audi and Volkswagen. It's not that economically the two continents, well, the US is not a continent, but in terms of size, it's about 300 million people. It's about the same size. Economically, it's the same value creation. But in terms of recent innovation, we are terrible. But there was someone. Yeah, it's only IT. I didn't put biotech. You're right. We have Novartis, we have Roche, we have, but they have GSK and Pfizer. But if we look at startups, biotech startups, again, they are Genentech and Genzyme, and we don't have many startups. But you're right, you're right. I want to have a debate about these things. And I promise that's the only question I'm asking, but I have many others. I have about 30 slides. And I will mix a number of things because, and Andre knows it, I'm totally biased. I spent 2 years of my life in Silicon Valley, and I fell in love with startups in Silicon Valley. And there's something I didn't understand why, being a student in engineering in the late 80s, nobody had told me in France that startups were something of interest and of some importance. And of course, when I arrived in the US, I was 25. It was probably too late. And I was thinking, there was something missing in my education. I did science. I was thinking about going to work in big established companies, but going to work for startups, nobody had told me. Arriving in the US, big shock. And then, well, and the shock has not finished, and 25 years later, I'm still trying to talk about this to students, to people, saying, in Europe, we are not more stupid, we have the same economic level, we have to work on helping young people, because I believe it's about young people. We have to help young people about trying, not being afraid of failing, and if they succeed, they will create jobs for our kids in the future. That's what is important. So, I will begin with a quote from another American guy. His name is Paul Graham. He's running an accelerator in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator, which is probably the best accelerator or incubator in the US. And he's saying interesting things. So he's saying, I read occasionally about attempts to set up technology parks in other places as if the active ingredient of Silicon Valley was the office space. An article about Sophia Antipolis, which is famous in France because it was supposed to be the big technology parks in the 70s, bragged that companies there, including Cisco, Compaq, IBM, NCR, Nortel, then the French realized these aren't startups. So he's saying basically people don't understand. They create technology parks, which we are doing, by the way, at EPFL, so we should learn the lessons. we should remember that innovation is not about office space, it's about value. And then he has his answer about what is Silicon Valley, which is also very nice. And he's saying Silicon Valley is very simple, although it's impossible to copy and replicate. But he said, few startups happen in Miami, for example, because although it's full of rich people, it has few nerds. It's not the kind of place nerds like. Whereas Pittsburgh has the opposite problem, plenty of nerds, but no rich people. Silicon Valley is just, you need ideas, you need money. Very simple. Well, not so simple. And if you like what he says, he has his own blog. It's easy to remember. It's paulgraham.com. And he's writing articles about innovation, which are really great articles. I really advise you to read the one called How to Be Silicon Valley. And by the way, his wife wrote this book, Founders at Work, which is a list of interviews of creators of startups, which is a very good book. There's an equivalent book called European Founders at Work, which you could read too. I love to read books about startups and innovation. Of course, this is provocative, but even serious people like this professor from California who is talking about how can we understand Silicon Valley, he's saying, now it's a more rational analysis, but he's saying that if you want to create serious technology clusters, you need universities, which is where you have the nerds, the people with idea. You need venture capital, which is the money, the rich people. So he's beginning exactly with the same two first ingredients, ideas and money, but then you need more complex system. You need experienced professionals in high tech. And when he says this, it doesn't mean people working at Nokia or at Alcatel or at Novartis, because these people don't necessarily understand what a startup is. A startup is totally different from a normal company. It's an adventure. It's a risk-taking company. So you need professionals experienced in startups. And I think the reason why Silicon Valley is so strong, it's because you have so many people who have been in startups. When you create another startup, it's easy to find such people who can help. You need many, many service providers, lawyers, headhunters, public relations, IP people, auditors, people who know how to help people in startups. And unfortunately, there's a fifth ingredient. These are the four easy ingredients to put in place. And the fifth ingredient is terrible. It's called the pioneering spirit, which encourages an entrepreneurial culture. So this one is not material. How do you create in a given country, your country, my country, that kind of spirit? I don't know. It's impossible to provoke and to create, but you can try and to encourage it. And that's, in a way, I could stop my presentation now. You know everything that I have to say, but I think it's important to remember, and I have the feeling in Europe, we always say, well, it's easy to do a tech cluster, build offices, attract some money, attract people with ideas, attract professionals, and everything will come. But if you don't have people who are ready to take risks, it will never work. And it's not easy. It's difficult to do startups. We cannot cheat by saying such things. Now, I don't want to be too pessimistic, and I hope I remember my next slide. Yes. We have very nice startups in Europe. At the moment, Skype was in Scandinavia, but if you know about Rovio or Supercell, which are game company for mobile applications, we have Outstrip. Unfortunately, Outstrip has moved to London, but there's Spotify, there's SoundCloud. Maybe you never heard about Navision or Autonomy, but these companies were very famous companies in the late 90s. So I tried to find a company in Romania. I couldn't, but Prezi, you may know Prezi is a tool to do presentation. It's from Hungary. It's in Budapest. So there's no reason not to have startups anywhere in Europe. So there's hope, but we are very far behind the US. And given the fact that Europe and the US are similar, there's still something wrong. Okay, so that was my introduction size. Now I can dig maybe into what we try to do at EPFL, which is at the same time nice, but remember, not as good as what the Americans have been doing. So I will talk about, in general, but you have heard many things already, but very quickly about innovation at EPFL, the different tools which are available. I will talk about the InnoGrants, which is the program I've been managing now for 10 years. I will talk about role models because I think it's as important to have people giving inspiration as trying to just help people without experience. I will not talk about inner grants, but if you want the presentation, I can give it to Andre. I can forward it so that you will have all the slides. So EPFL has a long history of trying to help entrepreneurs. It really began in 1986 with an industry liaison program. In 1991, the first building for startups was created just nearby. That was Building A. The Technology Transfer Office, where Andre is, was created in 1988. All these efforts about helping not only startups, but also collaborations with established companies and SMEs, all these things were put together in the Vice Presidency for Innovation and Technology Transfer in 2004. Well, the inner grants I will talk about in 2005, so 9 years ago. The EPFL Innovation Park in 2010, and our latest tool is something called the Forge, which I will talk about in a minute. So what's nice, I think, with Switzerland compared to France, which I was laughing about 5 minutes ago, everything in France is coming top down from Paris, and then everything is decided from the top. In Switzerland, it's different. It's a federal country. There are many experiments. Some of these experiments are not on the slide because they didn't work and they disappeared. But because Switzerland is federal, like the US, people make initiative, they try. If it doesn't work, they try something else. And then we add on top of what has been working, which is, I think, an interesting lesson. Today, the structure is a Vice Presidency for Innovation and Tech Transfer. Maybe you have seen that already, but Technology Transfer Office, managing collaborations, IP, licensing with companies, 7, 8 people, right, Andre? Alliance, small industry liaison, mostly with SMEs, also about 7 people. Partnerships, so the links with the big companies, much smaller unit, and the one for startups is very small inside EPFL. We're only 1.5 people. I'm working with someone with 40%, but we have a lot of tools outside of EPFL, so even if the unit is small, it's not so bad. And Adrienne Corboux, who is the Vice President, she's also the President of our Innovation Park, which is the reason of the dashed line you see on the right. Now, when I'm talking about a lot of tools, people love to use the concept of valley of death for startups. It's not so bad to have money for research. So as long as you do research, it's fine. But the day you're thinking, I want to create a company, which is here, it begins to be difficult because there's no money, right? There's a gap between research and the day you have customers and partners. It's also easy to find some money. There's a lot of money for established companies, but in between it's difficult. So you need grants, and the grants are part of that. You need prizes, awards, foundations, which is also money for early stage companies. So you have the friends and family and fools. You need business angel, you need early stage VCs. And we don't have to complain because there's a lot of such mechanisms in Switzerland. Unfortunately, the challenge is, and that was the reason why I was showing you these slides about Europe, it seems that many of our companies have a tough time to reach that point. And it's different reasons that we can discuss later. But one of the reasons is apparently our entrepreneurs don't want to grow their company. And because they don't want to, the investors are sometimes also reluctant in funding companies. So there's a kind of chicken and egg issue between entrepreneurs and investors. The ideas and the money in Europe doesn't seem to work as well as it is working in the US. So this is the different tools, and I will not go into the list, but there's a lot about funding ideas at EPFL. I think, Andre, you showed Enable before, but you see it's a big list of mechanisms. It's not only about money. I have a similar slide for other elements. So the office space is basically our innovation park, but my next slide will be about that. We have a lot of people giving advice. So we have mentors, we have coaches, we have training, we have a lot of entrepreneurship classes at EPFL and outside of EPFL. There's an initiative called Venture Lab, which is very important in Switzerland, which is giving free courses when our researchers want to create companies. Our alumni at EPFL have created something called the Acube Angel. I'm not sure the laser is working now. So in terms of advice, I don't think anything is missing. I have the feeling sometimes the advice given to entrepreneurs is not to grow their companies fast. I have the feeling that the culture in Switzerland is about creating sustainable small companies with 10, 50 people. And it's a debate again. Do we want big companies? Do we want small companies? I will come back about this. And it's a debate and we can discuss this again. And in terms of exposure, I think it's also important we do more and more efforts to push our entrepreneurs to talk about their projects because they are engineers, they hate marketing, they hate to talk about what they do, and if you hate talking about what you do, you will never sell anything. So we try to expose them. We have even programs where we send them to the US, to Boston, to San Francisco. So this is a competition for young people to go to Palo Alto for a week in September. This is something where we later we support and we select entrepreneurs to go to Boston for 10 days and they try to understand what is the technology ecosystem. We have projects backed by the Swiss Innovation Agency, which is about sending entrepreneurs to China, to India, to Brazil, emerging countries, to the US. And we are even creating a new program in September to send entrepreneurs to China for 10 days to understand why China is important for innovation. So a lively ecosystem is you need money, but you need advice, you need exposure, you need office space too. Even if Paul Graham is saying office space is not the active ingredient, you need some office space. So if I go a little more in detail, the innovation park is big. This is, you are here. This is the building where we are. So all this building, it's about 13 buildings, are for companies. There's one building for Logitech that we mentioned as one of our success stories. There's one building for Credit Suisse. Nestle has 1.5 buildings, but we have 4 buildings for our startups, which are part of the 13 buildings. We have about 80 startups probably at EPFL. And this is not cheap office space. The rent is quite expensive. But we have created additional tools. We have a very small building called Le Garage, which is nearly cheap. When a company is being created and people just need 20 square meters, they can go there. And even last November, we opened a new place, La Forge, which is an open space. So when someone has an idea and he's thinking about doing a startup and he's in his lab, but he has no clue about what it may mean to do startups, we offer him open space so that they can gather with other entrepreneurs, talk about what it is, exchange ideas, learning about it. And they can stay there for 6 months. If they need more time, they can stay another 6 months, so it's a maximum of 12 months. It's free. It's small. We can only have 20, 25 projects here. Maybe, André, you can show them the place to them tomorrow if you go to but it's on the first floor of that building. So we have an open space for the first months. We have the small buildings for the next 2 years. You can stay there for a maximum of 2 years. And then if you want to grow your company, you can go to our innovation park. So we have a kind of very rich offering. I have the feeling that there's not much more we can do. We can just hope that we will have this entrepreneurial culture and our entrepreneurs will try their best to grow company. And if I am correct, I will come back on this. But what I want to say as a kind of conclusion is this is an example of a startup which was created in 2004. It's called NextSync. Pedro was an Erasmus student from Spain, so he was here for 6 months. He had an idea. The idea was patented in April 2004. He didn't even want to do a startup. When I remember when I first met him, he said, I want to work for IBM because IBM will love my idea. And I told him, well, you can try, send your CV, but I'm ready to bet that IBM has no interest in your idea. He came back, he said, they're not interested. I'm really frustrated. I said, but think about a startup. And he didn't say what, but I had the feeling that he would say, what is he talking about? Is he crazy? But in fact, we tried to help him. We put him in through all these tools I mentioned before. Although 10 years ago, we didn't have as many tools, but CAST was this industry liaison program we had, so we did some marketing about his idea. We introduced him to investors. He won business plan competition in December 2004. But to make a long story short, it took him 2 years from his idea to convince his first investors in April 2006. And at the time, this was about $1 million. So 2 years. And during these 2 years, well, he had to survive. So he used all the tools. But what was nice with Pedro is that he had the vision that if he wanted to do a company, he should try to grow fast. And today, as you see on the top right, he has raised more than 15 million in funding. He has about 100 employees. He has about 10 million in sales. He's older than he was. You see a young student, so now you see an entrepreneur, but it's the same guy. And I met him 2 weeks ago. Now he's moving to New York because his business in the US. And hopefully we will have a nice success story with Nexink. That's the kind of dream story we would like to have. But again, it takes 10 years to make this company maybe a success. In the same, Facebook didn't exist, right, when Nexink was created. And Twitter, it took them only 6 years to be companies with thousands of employees. So even if Nexink is a nice success story for us, compared to what I showed you in the US, it's difficult, right? I'm coming back to this slide, but all this mechanism I showed to you exist in a PDF file of 40 slides. So there's a document which I give to entrepreneurs, but you can download where we have the list on websites of all our tools. So I think, again, what is important is it takes time to grow. It takes time also to try to explain to entrepreneurs why growth is important. But in the end, if we manage to do such things, it's nice. And hopefully we'll manage to build in Europe some interesting companies. And again, I added just an hour ago, sorry. So I don't remember my slide in detail, but I'm coming back to Silicon Valley. It's a slide I use oftentimes because, again, innovation, it's not about all these tools I was mentioning before, only it's about culture. And this is a place which existed in the 60s called the Wagon Wheel Bar. And just let me read, well, it's white, it's not so good, but look at what is written. During the 70s and 80s, many of the top engineers from Fairchild, National, and other companies would meet there to drink and talk about the problems they faced in manufacturing and selling semiconductors. It was an important meeting place where even the fiercest competitors gathered and exchanged ideas. The lesson from this place is even competitors work together to solve problems. And some of the issues we have with our entrepreneurs in Europe is that they're so afraid about talking about the ideas that they are totally paranoid. I met a young woman yesterday and she told me, no, but I cannot talk about my idea because it will be stolen. I'm trying to explain that nobody steals idea, and nobody steals years of work on a PhD. It's just impossible. So people should stop being afraid and remember that the reason why ecosystems are impressive, it's because people collaborate. Even competitors collaborate. And I was in Silicon Valley, that was 4 weeks ago, and I visited Google, and in fact it was a Romanian engineer who did his PhD here, Ion Constantinescu. I don't know if you know him, but he's now working at Google. And he was telling me, when I have an issue, I call my friend at Facebook, and they help me. We don't have this culture of, and they're competitors, right? But they work together. If you want to visit Google, there's a Romanian guy working, probably many, but. Okay, now I had another idea of another slide. So let me, yeah, that's the one. Sorry, it's not in the same order. You know, I have some debates with many people, and I tell them, what's the objective of creating startups? Well, it's about creating jobs. So I put here, well, how do we want to create 1,000 jobs? Is it by creating 1,000 companies with 1 employee? Is it about creating 1 company with 1,000 employees? Or is it 100 firms with 10 employees or 10 firms with 100 employees? And I'm trying to say, what's our mission in universities? And my answer, but you can stop me if you disagree, is we shouldn't focus on that. If it's about creating a company with 1 employee, I don't see the point. We can disagree, but that's not my point. This, we have no control. 1,000 employees, it's totally out of our focus, although we may hope about that, but there's no point. So when I think about how we help entrepreneurs, I have the initial focus is to try to push people to create companies with 10 people. And having a company with 10 people is already a challenge. Most of our companies have 5 employees at the Science Park. But if we can have such an initial focus, it's good. And then we should hope that some of them will reach 100 employees. Because 100 employees, you know, in Silicon Valley, it's simple. The value of a company can be correlated with the number of, the value of a company can be correlated with the number of employees. And usually, one employee is worth $1 million. If you look at any companies, maybe we could do the exercise I didn't with the first slide, but if we were multiplying the number of employees by 1 million, maybe we would get the cap table. So these companies' employee can be worth 10 million, this company can be worth 100 million. We, at EPFL, we had 2 M&As, so 2 companies were sold in the last 6 months for about 10 million. And they had 5, 6, 7 employees. We need such companies. Nextthing is a good example. 100 people. So I hope it will, but the investors were telling me, no, we don't want to sell this company for 100 million. We want to sell it for 1 billion. I'm a little arrogant, but hopefully it will come. So it was not in the right order, but I think it's an important slide. If we're thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship, it's where we should focus. And it's where we can have an impact just by encouraging. Now I'm coming back on the previous slide. I don't remember. Yeah. So this now on EPFL spin-offs, we have about 10 companies per year, 10, 12. Patrick Abicher, our president, loves to say we have about 1 startup per month, which is not that far. But you have to be careful with these numbers because as André knows, we have once a year a meeting when we count our startups. And sometimes I feel like we shouldn't count this company. We are counting companies just to show how good we are, but this doesn't mean anything. But still, it's interesting to show the numbers. It's one first metrics. In terms of the field, which changes the color, you see that about a quarter of our companies in blue is IT, so it means software and internet. About 10% is biotech, about 15% is medical devices, so we have about another quarter in health related, but then we have micro nanotechnologies, we have electronics, we have sensors, we have energy, so you see the kind of sectors we are in. And the reason why it's not sufficient to count the number of companies, it's also given what I told you before, it's important to count the number of companies which have the potential to grow. And my matrix, and again we can disagree, but my matrix is just to give the list of companies which have received venture capital. Because if you have venture capital, you have money, you can hire people. It's of course better to have customers, but unfortunately in technology, having customers, it's a challenge because you need first to have a product, and to have a product you need some money to build the product. This is nearly the full list of all EPFL spin-offs which got money. One made a lot of noise this week called Anokion because they raised 33 million Swiss francs, so about $38 million, and it was announced this week. It's a company in biotech. But if you look at the total number of companies, it's about 20. We had about 200 companies in the last 10 years. Yeah, 20 years, 200 companies, 10 per year. So. And we had about 20 companies, so 10% of our companies receive venture capital. It's not a lot. It's only 1 company out of 10 which has the potential to grow. So saying we have 10 companies per year should be mitigated with the fact that we have only 1 of this company which is growing. I have some numbers from Stanford and MIT. Stanford and MIT, 30% of their companies have venture capital. So not all of them, but 30%. So three times as much. So it's not the same numbers, but it's not bad. The one with stars have been bought, like EndoArt, which was bought for about $100 million, but it's $100 million. We're not talking about billion-dollar company. And they are in all the field of technology, from biotech to internet. What is interesting is that the investors are not only Swiss, they are French, they are Germans, and we even have American investors coming on the campus. So because venture capital is not that much developed in Europe, I think it's important to attract venture capital from the US. Any reaction after all these slides? Or I'm killing you with my message on startups, but you can please react, please disagree. I love debate, so we don't have to agree. But
There was
Thank you. Next slide, the InnoGrants. I'm finished with the... So the InnoGrants were created in 2005. It was an accident. Lombard Odier is a bank in Geneva. They had given 1 million to EPFL, and at the time it was do whatever you want with the money. And the vice president at the time said, well, we should support startups. And then he asked me, well, in fact, I should have told you a little of my background, but so I've been at EPFL for 10 years. Before being at EPFL, I was in venture capital for 6 years. In fact, in one of the companies which funded Skype. So and we invested in many startups from Silicon Valley. That was 6 years. And before these 6 years, I was in academic research. I was publishing papers in applied mathematics. So I had no clue about finance, but I love startups and I love the idea of helping entrepreneurs. So research, venture capital, EPFL. So the vice president told me, you've been in venture capital, why don't you use that money to support entrepreneurs? And at the time, I thought it was a mistake because I have the feeling, and it's an important message, that it's very difficult to support private entities inside a public institution. So I had the feeling it would be a mistake. But still, I said, there's money, let's try to support entrepreneurs. But it's not an easy tool. But so it's grants, it's not an investment. We are not receiving anything from the money we are giving to these projects. In fact, they're projects inside EPFL. We're not funding startups, we're funding projects. Hopefully some of them will become startups, with the idea of encourage idea creation, which means we are not trying to select the best projects. We want to select the most motivated individuals. Even if the idea, we don't have the feeling it's so good, it doesn't matter if we have the feeling the people are motivated. And by the way, remember something, you never know before when a project is launched if it will succeed or not. It's impossible to measure. So people ask me, how do you select projects? I just say, I try to see if the eye of the people is bright, if they're passionate about what they want. Because it's so difficult and you need to be so crazy to launch a startup. If you're too rational, it will never work. You need to be absolutely passionate. That's the main criteria. Of course, the idea should be good. We should have the feeling that they have some chance of success, but it's not as important. What is important with the InnoGrants is, in parallel to giving grants, I had the feeling that we also should do a little more about events, about exposure, like I said before. So I will talk also about role models to change the entrepreneurial culture. And there's a website, VPIV, which is our vice presidency, so vpiv.epfl.ch/InnoGrant, so you can go on the website. So Lombard Odier was the first sponsor, but then we were lucky because KPMG, Ineos, which is a chemical company, Computer Associates, which is a software company, Elbling, an SME in a small microtechnology companies in Bern, and also public entity, Innovo is the Canton de Vaud, their unit in innovation, and CTI is a Swiss innovation agency. So we have all these sponsors. So the budget of the InnoGrants, this money is about half public, half private. But our private sponsors are giving us the money and they have nothing in return. It's just sponsoring, marketing. And I love this picture because I'm trying to support crazy people. I'm not interested in just supporting rational projects, and I will explain you why in 5 minutes. In terms of numbers, because I think it's a little boring to have numbers, but since 2005, we got about 450 applications. And when I'm saying applications, I'm never asking for paper application. I meet the people, I talk to them, and if after an hour I have the feeling that there's something I would like to support, then we discuss more. Or I say, no, don't even apply because I will not support your project. So we try to have a very simple process. I told you we are 1.5 people in the unit, and we are lucky enough to decide ourselves. There's no committee. There's no one in the school, and there were some complaints of professors saying, why is Hervé, who has no experience in academia, has the right alone to support such projects with so much money? Because I spent, sometimes I said I wasted, but I spent 7 million Swiss francs, so it's not a small money in 10 years. But 450 applications, 70 grants, out of the 70 grants, 44 companies were created. And what is nice is that these 44 companies managed to receive 17 million in additional grants, so public money, but 83 million in equity. So it's a total of 100 million. So the 7 million wasted by myself contributed to 100 million in additional money. What is also, I think, very interesting is that these are the grants, not the applications, the grants which have been given. 24%, so a quarter are Swiss people, about 50% are European, both Western and Eastern Europe, and about another quarter is out of Europe. And if I go back to Silicon Valley, maybe you know, but about 50% of the founders of companies are foreigners. And I strongly believe that startups, you need to be young, and in many, many cases, you are foreigners. Because you cannot, it's more difficult to find an established job at Credit Suisse or at Nestlé when you are a foreigner. So what do? You create something yourself. And there's an important element here. So again, you see the numbers, 476 applications, 70 grants, 44 companies. I will maybe come back with this. These are the pictures of the people who received grant. In fact, this is Jan Constantinescu, the third from the left. He's the guy I met at Google last month. The reason we met is because I gave him the third inner grant in 2005. He tried to do a small company, it didn't work, then he was hired by Google, and it was very nice to see him 10 years later. It's mostly PhDs, postdocs from all over the world. It's never to a professor. It's to someone who has the desire to do something. Of course, they are backed by the professors. They do the inner grant in the lab for 1 year. And hopefully at the end of the year, they will have a prototype. They will have a business plan, maybe. They will have enough so that they can convince themselves it's worth doing a company, and they will manage to convince others that they should do this company. So they enter this process that I showed before about funding, about office space, about advice, about exposure. That's what we try to do. But we don't do much. I am never asking anything to these people. I'm never asking for a report. I'm never asking for anything. I'm just telling them, focus on your project. Try to do it. I can open doors. I can make introductions. See as many people as possible. See as many investors as possible. See as many customers as possible in your 12 months, because time flies extremely fast. And if you're still passionate about it after 12 months, do it. And we will try to help you. That's what we do. So these are the people. And these are the logos of the companies which have received an inner grant. So Anokian, which I mentioned, which raised 33 million this week, was created, received an inner grant in 2006, so eight years ago. It's again in all the field of technologies, from medical technologies, internet. That's not so much the point, but again, I think I went too fast on one slide. Something which is interesting, the inner grants were created in 2005. I have the feeling nobody was doing that in Switzerland, but I didn't invent anything. I just copied something which was done at MIT called the Deshpande Center. The Deshpande Center was created in, I don't remember, 2003, 2004, because the successful entrepreneurs gave $10 million to MIT, telling them, support entrepreneurship. And I was lucky, I visited MIT, I saw what they were doing, and they're just giving grants to the labs. So I just did the same. And what happened in Switzerland is, since the inner grants, there was a similar program called the Spin Fund at the full Swiss level. And there's been something, this is mobile applications, mobile and telecommunications. And this is robotics, which is another program established in 2003. This one was created, I'm not sure exactly when, but probably 2008 and ended in 2012. So now many more programs are trying to create these grants to support entrepreneurship. And I think, although I had the feeling it was a mistake to launch such a thing 10 years ago, I have the feeling today that it was not a mistake. It's an interesting approach to give an opportunity to people to work for 1 year on a project, with the idea, of course, that they will find additional support. But again, it's a debate we could have, but when I look at the results today, it's not bad. Again, I would love to see a Twitter, I would love to see an Intel, and it's far from obvious. And of course, I'm not doing anything with that anymore. These are the entrepreneurs, but we try to give them the desire to grow their companies. So that's what the InnoGrants is about. Very simple, right? Money given to someone for 12 months with the hope that they will build something from it. And if it doesn't work, we don't care. I show you numbers. Again, if 44 companies were created, it means 26 were not created. So 26 grants didn't give anything. Doesn't matter. Maybe it's money wasted, but maybe it was a good use of money.
So
Yes?
why don't other European universities do the same?
I think they do. I don't think we're alone. I have the feeling that many universities do it. They check. I'm sure if you go at Cambridge University of Cambridge, if you check, Zurich has something called the Pioneers Grant. Yes, they copied us. In fact, one of the vice president at ETH, Roland Zigwart, who is in robotics, arrived at the vice president for innovation at ETH, and he created the Pioneers Grant, and he's saying to his technology transfer people, I was at EPFL, they have this program, we should do the same. But it's good, right? It's good. I have the feeling that in the budget of a university, there should be a small piece for such ideas. Yes?
What do you know about Asian startups?
I don't know much. I've never been in Asia. But I can tell you that we had a visitor from Singapore 3 days ago, and they have exactly the same program at the National University in Singapore and US. And they have grants of he told me $180,000 per grant. So they are doing the same. But he was telling me we are not happy because the entrepreneurial culture that I was talking about before, they don't have. It was what he told me. I'm not sure. But he was telling me that we need to have more students who are willing to try. And he was talking about Singapore. And if you go Japan, and Korea, we had visitors from Korea, they're telling us, it's not in our culture to create something. You listen to the established companies. China is very different. I think China is moving fast. Now, talking about such programs, I am not sure, but I am sure many universities have similar programs. There was.
Do you have any figures about how much from the economy of the United States and Europe is due to startups?
No, but again, if you go back to my first slide, it's quite obvious that in the US, it's huge, right?
But they are big startups. In Europe, most likely there are more smaller ones.
Yeah, but I'm not an economist. I've not done the studies. But what I can tell you, I have a database of 5,000 companies out of Stanford University. So even the names I give you is the tip of the iceberg, but they have many more. I think Silicon Valley is creating 1,000 companies per year. I would not be, in fact, I tried to get the numbers. I was discussing with a colleague yesterday. Switzerland is probably creating between 100 and 200 startups per year, not more. And I have the feeling it's closer to 100 than 200. And which means if it's 7 million Switzerland, Europe is 300 million, so we could multiply by 20. No, 50. So it would mean that maybe we have 5,000 companies in Europe, startups per year created, but the value creation is not big.
There's data on the web saying more specifically not about economic impact of startups, because what exactly do you mean? And I saw data about the percentage of the workforce employed by venture capital backed companies. Now, venture capital backed is not necessarily a startup, because then it can be venture capital backed, but it could have 10,000 employees because it has grown very fast. But in the United States, what I remember, it was something between 20 and 30% of the entire workforce, which is huge, something around 20%, something roughly around there. I expect in Europe is about 10 times less, maybe around 2-3%.
I remember reading such things, and there were entrepreneurs who were very negative about the numbers because they were saying these studies have been paid by the venture capitalists who are doing self-promotion. But for sure, I'm sure that there's a 10-time ratio between Europe and US in terms of value creation. So maybe it's not 30%, maybe it's 10%. Because but indirectly, when someone is working at McDonald's, he's serving people who are working in startups, right? And if they did not have a job in startups, you would not have the jobs at McDonald's, right? So the indirect impact of startups might be 30 to 50% of the American economy. But you had a question too.
Did any follow-up studies on the grant receivers? So you have 26 people who didn't
Yeah.
the grant,
Yeah.
the companies didn't work. Have those people applied for other grants? Can you say that this would be how you could say that you are actually influencing an entrepreneurial?
That's interesting. Just one. Did you meet with Srini? Srini is one of the founders of Smart Cardia. So Smart Cardia, that was just before. Srini received an Euro grant for Smart Cardia, but Srini is twice on this picture. Srini is here, the third from the right, because he created first a company called Inox, which failed. So he stopped it, and then he's a founder of Smart Cardia. So he did it twice. So it's partly an answer to your question, right? Even if you fail, you do another one, right? But unfortunately, it's not always so positive. Well, this guy, Jean-Philippe, has created a project in the cloud infrastructure and didn't work, and now he's looking for a job. So it's not so easy. So in terms of following and give you the impact, I have the feeling that when someone has touched the startup world, they want to stay in it because you have more autonomy, you can try stuff. And when you look at Silicon Valley, people who have been in startups, most of the time they join other startups. So there's a kind of positive effect, even if it's a failure. But I would be careful about numbers. I don't have the statistics. Yes?
So what would be the ideal deliverable of this 1 year grant?
The deliverable? Ideal? They create a company.
You should have a prototype, you should go...
No, the ideal deliverable, if they create a company, I'm happy. And if this company is growing with venture capital, I'm even more happier. But there's no deliverable.
No, but just register it, or what do you mean create a company?
Well, I'm not measuring anything. I am on the long term. If I see that some companies grow, because even registering, I'm following for statistics, but in terms of success, if someone like Pedro Bados at NextSync reaches 100 employees after 10 years, I have the feeling it's a good success. So if I look at this company, Aleva, which is the third, has raised 15 million. They are doing electrodes for neurosurgery to help in the treatment of Parkinson's disease. Aleva for me is a success. But even Atolite, which is on the top right, which is doing microscopy, has raised 3 million with investors. They have customers in Belgium at IMEX, they have customers in China. It's a small company, but it's also a success. So I'm not trying to measure success. I hope there will be growth. But if you have a postdoc or a PhD who is becoming an entrepreneur, who is hiring 5 people and has transferred from science to becoming a manager, it's not easy to do, right? So for me, it's a success. I'm not allowed to say such things, but they are like children, right? If you see them succeed in life, you are happy, right? Whatever it means. It doesn't mean you need the Nobel Prize to be successful, right? So I'm just trying to say, if these people create companies and these companies create some value, it's good enough. If some of them are lucky and can create a lot of value, it's even better.
You said you had applications from Eastern Europe, for example.
Yeah.
And if someone would come to you with a molecule, let's say, and would
Could be.
one year to go to animal testing, for example, which is
Not enough, but
completely far from
yeah.
I mean, would you go for something like that? Because
Yeah.
different businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at, and I'm looking at time, we need to finish at 5:45, right? You have something at 6. For me, the hard limit is 5:45. But there's a guy called, I hope I will find this picture, but it's Rajvinder Leal. He's from India. Where is he? but it doesn't matter so much about the idea. But Rajvinder is working in a lab in biotech in cancer therapy. He has done an inner grant. It's not sufficient, but he's creating the company, he's talking to investors. And yes, it will take 10 years, but I don't care. There were maybe, I don't have the numbers, but there were 20, maybe 10, 20%, let's say 10% of the inner grants which were about molecules. So that's a possibility. It's totally open. Of course, an inner grant is far from sufficient, but there's so much money outside of EPFL. If he's passionate, he will find other support.
But you have to link to a professor here, or?
Yes, he has to be linked to a professor here. Well, he has to be linked. It doesn't mean he did his studies here. There's an example of another project. These two guys, this guy was working in the private sector. He was fed up with the private sector. He came to us saying, I have an idea. And by the way, there's a professor at EPFL who loves my idea. Would you support me? And I said, yes, you will become an EPFL employee in the lab, and I will pay you for 12 months. So we are totally flexible. In fact, if you look, let me go back to if you look at this, 100 of the applications out of the 400 were external people. I gave only 4, so I'm very careful with external ideas. But we are totally flexible. But they have to become an EPFL employee in one lab. So there has to be a professor who is supporting the idea in a friendly manner. It doesn't have to be his idea, but he has to be a...
So you only cover the salary, right?
We cover the salary and a little prototyping, which is a challenge, right, when you want to do a prototype. But you know, if you have a salary for 12 months, there's someone in the school who will provide you with some support in terms of consumables. And André can provide enable. And we can go up to 5:45, André? Good enough, no?
Yes, okay. We will have to run afterwards.
Well, it's 10 minutes.
Start at 6, huh?
It starts at 6.
Okay.
You want me to stop at what? In 5 minutes?
Which time?
Let's try.
No, let's
So I was talking about role models, and let me give you 2 other quotes of Silicon Valley famous people. The first one is Vinod Khosla, founder of Sun Microsystems, venture capitalist. He's saying, launching a startup is not a rational act. Success only comes from those who are foolish enough to think unreasonably. I really believe he's right. Entrepreneurs need to stretch themselves beyond convention and constraint to reach something extraordinary. Of course, if you say something like that, you could say, okay, it's not for me, it's for people who are not normal, so it can be totally destabilizing and people will be afraid. But there's another quote. Tom Perkins, Kleiner Perkins, most famous venture capital firm in the US. The difference is in psychology. Everybody in Silicon Valley knows somebody that is doing very well in high-tech small companies, startups. So they say to themselves, I'm smarter than Joe. If he could make millions, I can make $1 billion. It's not a typo, it's not million. I can make $1 billion. So they do, and they think they will succeed, and by thinking they can succeed, they have a good shot at succeeding. That psychology doesn't exist so much elsewhere. So it could be, again, totally depressing. We could say, if we don't have that psychology, we have no chance. So that's the reason why, in addition to grants, I was thinking, we have to invite people who have done startups and show to our young people that it's possible to do things. So what we have been doing at EPFL since 2005 is inviting people who are doing startups. Maybe they are here, maybe they are not here. And I will not give you the full list, but Eric Favre, for example, you don't know him, but he's inventor of Nespresso. I'm sure you know Nespresso. He was at Nestle, but he invented Nespresso. He's an EPFL engineer. He invented Nespresso, and he explained how Nestle tried to kill Nespresso for 10 years before it became a success. Big companies are the enemies of innovation. I'm always saying that as a provocation, but I strongly believe it's true. Even inside, they try to kill. Pierre Chapaz is a French entrepreneur. He created Kelku, sold to Yahoo for 500 million. He's living in Geneva. He came and he explained how he did a startup. And we do that not only with successful people. I talk about Pedro Bados. We invited him when was that? Well, I don't have the year, but that was about 6-7 years ago. We invite very different people. Arde Juice, very famous entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley, 5,000 people, 1 billion in sales, but he studied at EPFL in 1975. So by having an EPFL student, former student, talking about what it was to do startups, it was very interesting. This is a very strange entrepreneur. He's managing a rock music festival nearby. 300,000 people every summer for 1 week. He was an engineer. But he is an entrepreneur. It's about culture. It's not about business. It's not for profit. But when he told his story about how he built his festival, it was exactly the same story as creating a startup. He had many enemies, which was the neighbors of the festival, because they didn't like the noise in the summer. Everyone wanted to kill the festival. He said, I didn't know what I was doing, but it was fun. And we were lucky and we were successful. And it was exactly the same story. So we try to invite these people, trying to say to the students, listen to this, it's interesting. And we do that in the place where you will go in 15 minutes. Unfortunately, though the place you will see is very nice, 500 seats, we only have 100 students. No. We only have 100 people, 50 of these people being people like Andre and myself, too old to do startups, and 50 are students who are interested in becoming entrepreneurs. So it's a big challenge to change the culture. We are still doing it twice a year. We invited the CEO of Danone. Danone, I'm sure you know, and Franck Ribou was an EPFL student. This guy was my teaching assistant when I was a student in the US. Scientist who became an entrepreneur. He sold his company, Aceros, for $3 billion to Qualcomm. And we're also showing movies. I should mention that. There's a movie called Something Ventured that any student should have seen. You should buy that movie on Amazon and show it to all the students or people you know. There's another movie called Startup Kids, which is about European entrepreneurs. They are very good movie about but I will be able to show you the link. Sorry, I was too fast. This is the first movie I was thinking about. It's a documentary about the early days of Silicon Valley. We invite again twice a year, but this is another very nice company. They just sell tea. I don't know if you took the metro to come this morning, but if you stop at EPFL, there's a big place selling tea. It's called Takeaway. These two persons created, it's not really a startup, it's more a small company, but it's again the same story. And so we invite entrepreneurs, we showed movie. Maybe I have the feeling in the program you met with Mehdi Amignon later, sooner this afternoon. He did a small company called Jillion, which has been sold to Dailymotion. So we do that twice a year, and I think it's very important. We do startup weekends. In fact, it's the place where you will be in 30 minutes in the forum of the Rolex Learning Center. We try to encourage people to do experiments. And I will finish, so I said 5 minutes, I'm not that far. This is Daniel Borel. He's the founder of Logitech. He is an EPFL alumni, so Logitech was an EPFL spin-off. He also studied at Stanford University, and I have the feeling if he had not been to Silicon Valley, I'm not sure Logitech would have been Logitech. So when we claim Logitech as an EPFL spin-off, it's more a Stanford spin-off than a Logitech spin-off. But what is interesting is the following. The only answer that I may provide is a cultural difference between the USA and Switzerland. When we founded Logitech as Swiss entrepreneurs, we had to enter very soon the international scene. The technology was Swiss, but the USA and later the world defined our market, whereas production quickly moved to Asia. I would not like to look too affirmative because many things change and many good things are done in Switzerland. But I feel that in the USA, people are more open. Remember the wagon wheel bar, right? When you receive funds from venture capitalists, you automatically accept an external shareholder who will help you in managing your company and who may even fire you. In Switzerland, sorry for the typo, in Switzerland, it is not very well accepted. One prefers a small pie that is fully controlled to a big pie that one only controls at 10%. And this may be a limiting factor. So that's my conclusion. That's Daniel Borel. He's very famous in Switzerland, and he's giving the same message I have experienced in my life in the last 20 years. I have a blog on startups that I can mention later, but again, it's about culture, right? Remember Paul Graham, it's about nerds receiving money. We can put all the efforts in place. If you don't have young people who try and we support them in a friendly manner, nothing will happen. I will not talk about the inner grants. This is a document I can provide to you. That's it. You can have a break and